The sprawling metropolis of Corinthia Prime never slept. Its skyline was a jagged silhouette of needle-sharp towers, each adorned with glowing advertisements that pulsed like artificial stars against the smog-choked sky. It was here, amid the cacophony of traders, mercenaries, and diplomats, that Ezra Stonewall found himself descending into one of the city's most infamous underworld venues, the Echelon Auction House. The air inside was thick with tension and the faint, metallic tang of blood. Ezra adjusted the collar of his dark jacket, the insignia of the Terran diplomatic corps sewn discreetly inside, and surveyed the room. The crowd was a mix of elites, wealthy aristocrats, corporate overlords, and alien dignitaries whose species ranged from vaguely humanoid to unsettlingly insectoid. Each wore masks of indifference or arrogance, their gazes fixed on the central stage where lives were bought and sold like commodities. Ezra hated every moment of it. His mission had been clear: secure the Croniaid, a rare and highly sought-after genetic anomaly. According to the briefing, Croniaids were individuals capable of manipulating localized time fields, an ability coveted by militaries, corporations, and criminal enterprises alike. The diplomatic corps had intercepted intelligence that one such individual, a woman, was being auctioned that night. Ezra was to ensure she ended up in Terran hands, no matter the cost. The bidding had begun, and Ezra scanned the lineup. Most of the captives stared at the ground, their spirits broken. But then, he saw her. She stood taller than the others, her bearing almost regal despite the chains that bound her wrists. Her skin shimmered faintly under the stage lights, a side effect of the Croniaid genome. Her hair, silvery and weightless, framed a face marked by sharp cheekbones and defiant eyes the color of molten gold. Even from his place in the crowd, Ezra could see the fire in her gaze, a refusal to break, even under the weight of her circumstances. Her auctioneer, a rotund alien with a grotesquely bulbous head, extolled her value in a language that was simultaneously translated into the neural implants of the attendees. Behold, Lot 492, a Croniaid in her prime. Witness her elegance, her strength. A perfect specimen, capable of Ezra stopped listening. He didn't care for the pitch, nor the sickening applause that followed. All that mattered was the woman standing on the stage, glaring at the crowd like a queen surveying her oppressors. The bid started high and climbed rapidly. A Xylarian merchant in shimmering robes raised the stakes, his mandibles clicking with excitement. A corporate tycoon from the Rigel system countered, his bid transmitted through an AI assistant hovering by his shoulder. Ezra felt a bead of sweat run down his temple. The diplomatic corps had allocated a significant sum for this mission, but if the bidding spiraled out of control, he'd be forced to improvise. 2 million credits, came the Xylarian's mechanical rasp. 3 million, countered the Rigelian. The auctioneer's grotesque smile widened. Do I hear 4 million credits? Ezra stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. 5 million. The room went silent, heads turning to locate the new bidder. Ezra felt the weight of their stares, but his attention was locked on Aliana. Her golden eyes flicked toward him, narrowing as if trying to decipher his motives. For a brief moment, their gazes connected, and he felt something stir, a mix of resolve and something deeper, something he couldn't name. The Rigelian tycoon frowned, whispering hurriedly to his AI. The Xylarian clicked its mandibles in frustration. No one else moved to counter. 5 million credits, the auctioneer crowed, his voice trembling with barely concealed glee. Sold, to the gentleman in the back. Ezra exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing only slightly. The hardest part was over, but the real challenge lay ahead. As the auctioneer motioned for Aliana to be escorted off the stage, Ezra pushed through the crowd to claim his purchase. Up close, she was even more striking. Her shimmering skin seemed to ripple faintly as if responding to some unseen energy. The guard shoved her forward, and Ezra caught her arm to steady her. Her muscles tensed at his touch, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I don't know who you are, she said, her voice low but fierce, but if you think you own me, I'll kill you the first chance I get. Ezra suppressed a smile. Good. Because I don't plan on owning you. Her brows furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. Ezra leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I'm getting you out of here, he said. But you'll have to trust me. Eliana didn't respond, but the fire in her eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by cautious curiosity. Ezra took that as a sign of hope. As they exited the auction house, the neon glow of Corinthia Prime casting long shadows across the street, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that his mission had just become far more personal than he'd anticipated. The sterile hum of the transport shuttle reverberated through the dimly lit cabin as Ezra guided Eliana aboard. Outside, the towering structures of Corinthia Prime glittered under its perpetual artificial twilight, but inside the shuttle, tension hung heavy in the air. Eliana's wrists were still bound, though the electric field keeping her shackles active had been deactivated. She sat stiffly on the edge of the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes fixed on Ezra, who busied himself at the control console. Her distrust was palpable, but there was something else: curiosity. You paid 5 million credits for me, she finally said, her voice sharp. Why? Ezra kept his gaze on the controls as he keyed in the pre-programmed flight route. The ship's thrusters hummed to life, and the shuttle eased off the ground with a gentle lurch. I didn't buy you, he said evenly. I rescued you. Her scoff was immediate. Rescue implies freedom. Last I checked, I'm still in chains. Ezra turned to face her, his expression calm but firm. You'll be free soon. First, we need to get out of Corinthia. This place is crawling with slavers, bounty hunters, and corporate mercenaries. Until we're clear, those chains stay on. And I'm supposed to trust you? Eliana leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I've been passed from one rescuer to another more times than I can count. All of them had promises, and all of them wanted something. Ezra met her gaze without flinching. What I want, he said, is to dismantle the system that put you in those chains. But first, I need you alive and safe. Her expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered. And what's in it for you? Ezra hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I used to believe in the system. I thought the Terran government stood for justice. But seeing what they're willing to ignore, what they're willing to exploit, I can't be a part of that anymore. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with unspoken implications. Before Eliana could respond, a proximity alarm blared, jolting them both. Ezra spun back to the controls, his heart sinking as the display lit up with warning indicators. A cluster of red blips pursuit craft had locked onto their trajectory. The auction house hadn't wasted any time sending out its retrieval team. Looks like we've got company, Ezra muttered. He quickly activated the shuttle's defensive systems and adjusted their course toward the dense asteroid belt on the edge of Corinthia's orbit. Hold on. This is going to get rough. The shuttle lurched violently as laser fire streaked past them, illuminating the cabin with flashes of red and white. Eliana braced herself against the console, her golden eyes widening as Ezra executed a sharp dive to avoid the pursuing craft. Do you even know how to fly this thing? She shouted over the blaring alarms. Barely, Ezra admitted, yanking the controls hard to the left to dodge a plasma missile. The shuttle skimmed the edge of an asteroid, its shields flaring from the impact. But I'm a fast learner. Eliana shook her head, muttering something in a language Ezra didn't recognize. Let me help, she said, leaning toward the navigation console. Ezra glanced at her shackles, then back at the rapidly approaching asteroid field. He hesitated only a moment before reaching into his jacket and pulling out a small device. With a quick press, the shackles fell away, clattering to the floor. Don't make me regret this, he said. Eliana ignored him, her fingers flying over the navigation controls with practiced ease. Within seconds, she had recalibrated their trajectory, weaving them through the asteroid field with a precision that left Ezra momentarily speechless. The pursuing craft struggled to keep up. One miscalculated turn sent a fighter careening into an asteroid, its fiery explosion briefly lighting up the field. Eliana smirked, her confidence growing with each successful maneuver. "You're better at this than I am," Ezra admitted, trying to focus on the weapon systems. He managed to fire a few well-placed shots, disabling another craft. "Keep them off my tail, and I'll get us out of here," Eliana replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. Together, they worked in unison, a strange but effective team. As they emerged from the asteroid field, the remaining pursuit craft broke off, unwilling to follow them into the unregulated space of the fringe. Ezra exhaled deeply, slumping back in his seat. "That was impressive." Eliana turned to him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Not bad for someone who barely knows how to fly." He chuckled, but the levity was short-lived. The realization of what lay ahead quickly sobered him. "We've got a long way to go," he said, setting the ship on autopilot. "The fringe is safe, but it's not paradise. If we're going to survive, we'll need to trust each other." Eliana studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "Trust is earned, human. But you've bought yourself a chance." Ezra smiled faintly, feeling the weight of her words. For the first time since the mission began, he felt a flicker of hope not just for Eliana, but for himself as well. As the shuttle drifted into the vast expanse of uncharted space, a strange silence settled over them. It wasn't the silence of mistrust or fear, but something new, the quiet beginnings of understanding. The verdant skies of Viridian 3 stretched endlessly above, a pale green canopy dotted with twin suns that bathed the land in perpetual warmth. Towering fern-like trees, their leaves the size of small spacecraft, swayed gently in the breeze. The air was alive with the hum of alien insects and the distant calls of creatures Ezra couldn't identify. It was a stark contrast to the sterile metal and artificial lights of Corinthia Prime, a world where life felt abundant and untamed. Ezra stood on the ridge overlooking the valley below, a bag of salvaged supplies slung over his shoulder. Behind him, Eliana inspected the half-built shelter they had spent the last 3 days constructing. It was crude, little more than a frame of wood and reinforced plasteel, but it was sturdy enough to withstand the planet's frequent storms. "You're terrible at cutting straight lines," Eliana remarked, holding up one of the wooden beams Ezra had fashioned. Her golden eyes sparkled with faint amusement, a rare but welcome sight. Ezra wiped the sweat from his brow and smirked. "If I'd wanted perfect craftsmanship, I'd have brought a team of engineers." "I thought humans were supposed to be resourceful," she teased, but there was no malice in her tone. "I'm plenty resourceful," he shot back. "You're the one who figured out how to tap into the planet's geothermal vents for power." Eliana shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I've had to adapt." "Survival does that to you." The admission hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her past. Ezra didn't press her. He had learned early on that Eliana shared only what she wanted, when she was ready. Instead, he joined her at the shelter, inspecting her progress. "You've got a good eye for structure," he said, admiring the way she had reinforced the walls with vines and resin from the native trees. "Not my first time building a home," she replied quietly. "Though it's the first time it's felt mine." Her words carried a vulnerability that caught Ezra off guard. He turned to face her, his expression softening. "It is yours. Ours, if you want it to be." Eliana looked at him, her gaze searching. For a moment, the defiance that had defined her seemed to waver, replaced by something gentler. "We'll see." The weeks that followed life on Viridian 3 was hard, but it was free. The shelter grew into a modest home, complete with a water filtration system and a small garden where Eliana cultivated the planet's edible flora. Ezra spent his days scavenging for materials, improving their defenses, and mapping the surrounding terrain. At night, they sat by a fire, sharing stories of their vastly different lives. Eliana spoke of her homeworld, Silithia, a place of crystalline seas and skybound cities. She told him of the night the slavers came, how they tore her family apart and left her shackled in darkness for years. Ezra listened, his heart heavy with anger and sorrow. In return, he shared his disillusionment with the Terran government. Once a rising star in the diplomatic corps, he had believed in humanity's potential for justice and fairness. But the deeper he delved into the system, the more he saw its corruption, alliances with slavers, exploitation of weaker worlds, and a willingness to turn a blind eye to suffering for profit. "You risked everything to save me," Eliana said one evening, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Why?" Ezra hesitated, staring into the flames. "Because you deserved better. Because I couldn't stand by and let them win." Her gaze lingered on him, as though she were trying to unravel a puzzle. "You're not like most humans I've met." "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied with a small smile. For the first time in years, Eliana felt something unfamiliar: hope. A turning point. The turning point came one night during a violent storm. The wind howled through the valley, rain lashing against the walls of their shelter. Eliana sat by the window, watching the storm with a distant look in her eyes. "You don't have to stay here," she said abruptly, her voice cutting through the noise. "You could leave, go back to your people. You've done enough for me." Ezra, who had been stoking the fire, turned to her with a frown. "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to face him, her expression conflicted. "I don't know. I've never had choices before." Ezra crossed the room and sat across from her, his blue eyes meeting her golden ones. "Then stay and make those choices. Stay and see what life could be like without chains." Her breath caught at the sincerity in his voice. For so long, her life had been defined by survival, by reacting to forces beyond her control. The idea of creating a life, of shaping her own destiny, was terrifying and exhilarating. "I'll think about it," she said softly, but deep down, she already knew her answer. A new kind of family. As the days turned into weeks, their partnership deepened. What began as mutual necessity evolved into something more profound, a shared dream of a life free from the horrors of their past. The connection between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. It was during one quiet evening, as they watched the twin suns set over the horizon, that Eliana spoke the words that had been lingering in her heart. "You asked me once if I wanted this to be ours," she said, her voice steady. "I think I do." Ezra turned to her, his expression softening. "You're sure?" She nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "I've never been more sure of anything." For the first time since they'd met, Ezra reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Together, they watched the sun sink below the horizon, their shared dream now a reality. The twin suns of Viridian III cast long golden rays over the valley, illuminating a scene of quiet prosperity. The small home that Ezra and Eliana had built now stood at the heart of a thriving settlement, a sanctuary for the displaced and the forgotten. Refugees from across the galaxy had found their way to the fringe, drawn by whispers of a place where freedom reigned. Ezra and Eliana had welcomed them all. The once crude shelter was now a sturdy compound, surrounded by cultivated fields and geothermal-powered structures. The settlement buzzed with life, children playing under the towering trees, adults tending to crops or repairing starships. Above it all, Eliana stood on a high ridge, her golden eyes surveying the scene below with quiet pride. Behind her, Ezra approached, his steps familiar and steady. His hair had grayed slightly at the temples, and faint lines creased the corners of his eyes, but his presence remained as strong as ever. "They're thriving," he said, coming to stand beside her. Eliana nodded. "And they're safe. That's all that matters." The children of the stars, in the years since their escape from Corinthia, Ezra and Eliana had built more than a settlement, they had built a family. Their two children, Kale and Lyra, were a testament to the blending of their worlds. Kale, the elder, had inherited Ezra's steady determination and Eliana's sharp intellect. Lyra, younger by 3 years, possessed a vibrant curiosity and a spark of mischief that mirrored her mother's defiance. But it was their shared inheritance of Aliana's croniate abilities that set them apart. From a young age, both children had demonstrated the power to manipulate localized time fields. At first, it was small things slowing a falling object, speeding up a flower's bloom, but as they grew, so did their control. Ezra and Aliana worked tirelessly to help their children master their gifts, teaching them not only how to wield their abilities but also the responsibility that came with them. Your powers don't make you better than others, Aliana often reminded them. They make you their protector. Kale took the lessons to heart, training rigorously to refine his control. Lyra, ever the rebel, pushed boundaries, often experimenting with her abilities in ways that left Ezra's heart racing. The shadows of the past, despite the peace they had found, the galaxy hadn't forgotten Ezra and Aliana. Word of their settlement had spread, drawing attention from allies and enemies alike. One day, an unfamiliar starship appeared in Viridian skies, its sleek design and polished hull marking it as a vessel of the Interstellar Council. Ezra and Aliana stood side by side as the ship landed in the clearing. From its hatch emerged a delegation of council representatives, humans, Xylarians, and other species, all clad in the austere uniforms of interstellar law. At their head was Ambassador Rael Torin, an old acquaintance of Ezra's and a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol. Ezra Stonewell, Torin greeted, his voice tinged with formality. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," Ezra replied, his tone cool. "What do you want?" Torin's gaze shifted to Aliana, then to the bustling settlement behind them. "The Council is aware of your activities here. You've created a haven for fugitives, many of whom are wanted by powerful entities." "They're not fugitives," Aliana interjected, her voice sharp. "They're free people." Torin ignored her, focusing on Ezra. "The Council cannot ignore your actions. However, there is an alternative." Ezra crossed his arms. "I'm listening." Torin gestured to the settlement. "The Council is prepared to offer amnesty to you and your people on the condition that you testify against the slave trade networks that brought you here. Your testimony, combined with Aliana's, could bring down some of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy." Ezra exchanged a glance with Aliana. The risk was enormous. Testifying would make them targets of the very forces they had worked so hard to escape. But the potential reward, the chance to strike a decisive blow against the system that had enslaved so many, was too great to ignore. "We'll do it," Aliana said before Ezra could respond. He looked at her, surprised. She met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "We've been running long enough. It's time to fight." The trial of the galaxy. The trial was held on Araxis Prime, the gleaming capital of the Interstellar Council. The chamber was packed with delegates, reporters, and representatives from dozens of worlds. Holocameras floated in the air, broadcasting every word to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Ezra and Aliana sat side by side at the witness stand, their faces calm but resolute. They recounted everything: the horrors of the slave trade, the corruption of the systems that enabled it, and their fight to build something better. Aliana's testimony, in particular, struck a chord with the audience. Her poise and eloquence, combined with the raw emotion of her story, silenced even the most skeptical delegates. But it was Kale and Lyra who delivered the final blow. The Council had been reluctant to acknowledge the existence of the Croniades, fearing the implications of such power. When Kale and Lyra demonstrated their ability, slowing the Council's master clock to a crawl, it forced the galaxy to confront the potential for both exploitation and protection. "This is what you're fighting for," Aliana said, gesturing to her children. "Not just my family, but every family torn apart by greed and cruelty. End this. Make it right. A legacy of freedom." The Council's ruling was swift and unprecedented. The slave trade was declared illegal across all member systems, and enforcement measures were immediately implemented. Though the fight was far from over, it was a decisive victory, one that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Back on Viridian 3, the settlement celebrated with cautious optimism. Ezra and Aeliana stood at the heart of the gathering, their children by their side. For the first time in years, Ezra felt the weight of his mission begin to lift. "You did it," he said, turning to Aeliana. She shook her head. "We did it." As the suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, the family stood together, a symbol of what was possible when courage met conviction. Their story was no longer just about survival, it was about hope, freedom, and the promise of a brighter future.